Have you ever wondered how one of the world's largest empires, built on the backs of millions, finally turned its back on the slave trade? It's a story of greed, incredible cruelty, but also of surprising heroes and a seismic shift in human consciousness. This is the story of the end of the British slave trade. For over 200 years, the British Empire was a dominant force in the transatlantic slave trade. It was a brutal, industrial-scale operation. Ships packed with human beings, treated as cargo, sailed the infamous Middle Passage from West Africa to the Americas. Millions were stolen from their homes, forced into unimaginable conditions, and sold into a life of bondage to work on sugar, cotton, and tobacco plantations. This trade wasn't just a side business, it was the engine of the British economy. The profits were staggering, building cities like Liverpool and Bristol, funding banks, and enriching a whole class of merchants and aristocrats. To many, it seemed like an unbreakable, essential part of the empire's power. It was simply the way things were. But beneath the surface of this economic powerhouse, the seeds of change were being sown. The Enlightenment, a powerful intellectual movement sweeping across Europe, began to challenge old ideas. Thinkers like John Locke and Jean-Jacques Rousseau championed concepts of natural rights, liberty, and human dignity. Their ideas began to trickle down, making people question the very morality of owning another human being. How could a nation that prided itself on freedom be the world's leading trafficker of enslaved people? This fundamental contradiction started to weigh on the nation's conscience. At the same time, a powerful religious awakening was taking place. Evangelical Christians, like John Wesley, the founder of Methodism, began to preach passionately against slavery. They saw it not as an economic issue, but as a profound sin in the eyes of God. They argued that all people were equal before God, and that enslaving another person was a direct violation of Christian principles. This moral and religious fervor provided the powerful emotional fuel needed for a mass movement. It wasn't just an intellectual debate anymore, it was a battle for the soul of the nation. And then came the voices of those who had experienced the horror firsthand. People like Olaudah Equiano, an educated and articulate man who had been enslaved as a child, purchased his own freedom, and settled in London. In 1789, he published his autobiography, The Interesting Narrative of the Life of Olaudah Equiano. This was a game-changer. For the first time, the British public could read a powerful first-hand account of the slave trade's brutality. Equiano described the terror of his capture, the nightmarish conditions on the slave ship, and the soul-crushing reality of plantation life. His book was a bestseller, and it horrified its readers, turning abstract numbers into human stories of suffering and resilience. These powerful currents, intellectual, religious, and personal, converged to create one of the world's first great human rights campaigns. A small group of dedicated activists formed the Society for the Abolition of the Slave Trade in 1787. Key figures like Granville Sharp, a brilliant lawyer who fought for the rights of enslaved people in English courts, and Thomas Clarkson, a tireless investigator who risked his life gathering evidence of the trade's horrors, were the movement's backbone. Clarkson traveled thousands of miles on horseback, collecting testimonies, diagrams of slave ships, and instruments of torture like shackles and thumbscrews. He was the ultimate investigative journalist of his time. Their strategy was brilliant and multifaceted. They understood they needed to win over both Parliament and the public. They launched a massive public awareness campaign. They printed pamphlets, posters, and books. They organized public meetings and lectures across the country, showing people the evidence Clarkson had gathered. One of the most iconic images of the campaign was the "Am I Not a Man and a Brother?" medallion, designed by Josiah Wedgwood. It depicted an enslaved African man in chains, kneeling and pleading for his humanity. This simple, powerful image became the logo of the movement, appearing on everything from bracelets to snuff boxes. It was a viral marketing campaign, 18th century style. Another powerful tactic was the sugar boycott. The abolitionists urged the British public, particularly women who made the household purchasing decisions, to stop buying sugar produced by enslaved labor. It was a direct hit on the profits of the West Indian planters. Hundreds of thousands of families participated, choosing to drink their tea unsweetened or buy sugar from India, where it was farmed by free labor. This was one of the first successful examples of a mass consumer boycott for a moral cause, showing that ordinary people could wield real economic power. Inside Parliament, the fight was led by the eloquent and deeply religious Member of Parliament, William Wilberforce. For nearly 20 years, Wilberforce was the public face of the abolitionist cause in government. Year after year, he would introduce a bill to abolish the slave trade, and year after year, it would be defeated by the powerful West India lobby, a group of wealthy MPs with deep financial ties to the plantations. They argued that abolition would ruin the economy, weaken the navy, and destroy the empire. The opposition was fierce and the political battles were long and exhausting. Wilberforce faced ridicule and immense pressure, but his conviction never wavered. The turning point came in the early 1800s. Several factors aligned. The Haitian Revolution, a successful slave revolt that created the first independent Black Republic, sent shockwaves across the Atlantic. It struck fear into the hearts of plantation owners, but it also proved that enslaved people would fight and die for their freedom. Furthermore, the ongoing wars with Napoleonic France changed the political calculus. Abolishing the trade could be framed as a strategic move against France, which was trying to revive its own slave-based colonies. Finally, after 2 decades of relentless campaigning, the tide turned. The abolitionists changed their strategy slightly, pushing first for a bill that would ban British subjects from participating in the slave trade with French colonies. This was a clever political move that passed in 1806. Riding this momentum, they pushed for the final total ban. In 1807, the Abolition of the Slave Trade Act was passed by an overwhelming majority in Parliament. After a 20-year struggle, the largest slave-trading nation in the world had banned the trade. There were celebrations in the streets. For the campaigners, it was a moment of incredible triumph. But the story doesn't end there. The 1807 Act only banned the trade, not slavery itself. The hundreds of thousands of people already enslaved in the British colonies remained in bondage. The abolitionist movement had to regroup for a new fight. It took another 26 years of campaigning, political maneuvering, and pressure from rebellions in the colonies, like the Baptist War in Jamaica, before the Slavery Abolition Act was passed in 1833. This act finally freed over 800,000 enslaved people across the British Empire. However, it came at a staggering cost. The British government paid out £20 million, a colossal sum at the time equivalent to about 40% of the government's entire annual budget, not to the formerly enslaved people but to the slave owners as compensation for their loss of property. The freed people themselves received nothing and were forced into a period of unpaid apprenticeship that was little better than slavery. The end of the British slave trade is a complex legacy. It's a story of incredible moral courage and the power of a dedicated group of people to change the world. It shows how public opinion, when mobilized, can challenge even the most powerful economic interests. But it's also a story of deep hypocrisy and compromise, where the property of the enslavers was valued more than the lives of the enslaved. It's a crucial chapter in our shared history that reminds us that the fight for true freedom and justice is often a long, difficult, and imperfect journey. The echoes of this history continue to shape our world today, and understanding it is essential to understanding ourselves. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into history. Let me know in the comments what you think. What part of this story stood out to you the most? Thanks again, and see you next time.